It's all about quarterbacks tonight. Summer school started 1 week ago, and in that time, Underdog Fantasy has launched 5 new contests, 4 of which have already filled. We're in the heart of best ball summer, so what better time to revisit how to approach drafting quarterbacks? Let's get to it. Welcome to Summer School Club Fantasy's Best Ball podcast, streaming exclusively on YouTube. I am Amandolia, and with me, as always, is Matt Record. Matt, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing very well. How are you, Austin?
I'm doing great. You know, this is the first time that we've had the show intro actually like while we're recording. Last time we just kind of inserted it. Sorry for getting a little bit behind the scenes there, but so it kind of threw me off a little bit. You know, I have to like hit buttons and whatnot, and also like have my script ready.
It looked sharp, and you nailed it like a true professional. So things
Yeah.
are off to a great start for this drafting QBs episode.
Yeah, I'm sure Josh will also be happy to hear me reference a script whenever he watches this back too. I'm sure that'll bring him loads of joy. But before we move on, don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Remember, this streams exclusively from YouTube, so you need to be there to get this episode. And episodes will continue to air Fridays at 6, but we have other fantasy football content and fantasy golf content coming to you 7 days a week at this point. And Matt and I have a great, exciting announcement about this show. We have decided to bring you cram sessions as part of the summer school stream on YouTube. What does that mean? Well, as you probably know, if you've listened to us before, we care a lot about week 17 correlation and week 17 matchups as part of our best ball tournament strategy. And so instead of trying to have one episode where we just jam all of week 17 into it, we're going to be releasing short episodes covering every week 17 matchup. And we're going to do it in order of how we are ranking them in terms of how good or bad we think the matchup is. We're starting with 16. So we get to start with the juicy, down bad. And you're just going to have to tune in to figure out what that is, because we're not going to spoil it here. We're excited to bring this to you. It'll be another way that you can kind of think about the different teams and how you might want to draft them in best ball. But tonight, we are focused on quarterbacks, and we're going to start talking through a positional breakdown, discussing the strategy behind how to draft each position. And of course, as I've mentioned many times, we are going to start with quarterbacks. Also, a friendly reminder, if you drop questions in the chat, we will get to those in the following episode. And we do have a listener question tonight. So you will see, we do actually answer those questions that you put in the comments or the chat. So let's get to quarterbacks. Matt, we're going to start with very simple. How many quarterbacks should you be drafting in best ball?
So for me, it's 2 to 3. The answer is 2 to 3, and I think it depends on where the first quarterback you draft. How confident are you in their ability to kind of carry your team? Because in all of these best ball tournaments, like roster spots are so limited, and roster construction is so important. So if you get a Josh Allen at his ADP, he better be Josh Allen, top 5 QB for you the entire year. Otherwise, it wasn't worth it. But because your entire build is kind of based on that, you can maybe settle for 2 QBs and use that roster spot somewhere else. However, if you wait and less consistency, you might say, maybe go to 3. I don't know how you feel about going 1 or 4 QBs, but for me, 2 to 3 is the answer.
Yeah, I'm very much with you there. And I think most of the best ball community is also there. So I'm going to be referencing a lot of data from Best Ball Mania 4. That was last year's Best Ball Mania. It's the largest data set that we have to pull from on how people are drafting on Underdog Fantasy and the success rates of those draft styles. And so last year, 96% of drafters drafted 2 to 3 quarterbacks. So it is the vast, overwhelming majority strategy is to go the 2 to 3 quarterback route. And what is interesting is that there was a slight increase in the number of playoff teams that ended up with 2 to 3 quarterbacks at 96.8%. So that does show that there was a slight advantage to those teams that did go the 2 to 3 quarterbacks and stayed away from 1 to 4, which we're going to get a little bit more in the weeds on that. But first, I want to talk about drafting 3 quarterbacks specifically because, Matt, we referenced last year and the year before were interesting seasons in terms of quarterbacks where there was a ton of injuries, ton of guys losing their jobs at different times of the year. And so 3 quarterback strategies seem to be in because of the number of quarterbacks that got to start. How are you feeling going into 2024 about prioritizing 3 quarterbacks maybe more than you would in the past?
Yeah, I mean, having that extra QB definitely gives me some peace of mind. So I've been going after the 3 quarterback route. And what's really fun about the depth at quarterbacks and all these rookies that are coming in, really late rounds, you're getting presumed starters as your sort of third quarterback. Now, which one you go with is, a dealer's choice, like which rookie you think is going to be better than others. But I've been really liking targeting, the 2 quarter, and we'll talk about when we're drafting our quarterbacks, but drafting 2 that you feel fairly good with, and then taking that dart throw right there at the end.
Yeah, I do. I'm a big fan of that. And to put some numbers behind that, teams about 40% of the overall field last year drafted 3 quarterbacks. There was a slight increase in playoff teams. 41% of playoff teams drafted 3 quarterbacks. What's the most interesting thing to me is that the jump from there to the finals was actually pretty significant. About 46% of finalists in Best Ball Mania 4 had 3 quarterback builds. So it seems like it was actually an advantageous strategy for people to make it to the finals, to not just advance to the playoffs, but to get all the way to the finals. And in fact, the winner of Best Ball Mania last year had a 3 quarterback build. So it did seem like there was some merit to that strategy, although it wasn't necessarily conclusive. There, you could still do really well with just the 2 quarterbacks. But let's talk about drafting 1 or 4, because we'll get this question at times. People are like, "Oh, maybe I should do something different." Let's just start with 1. What about drafting 1 quarterback, Matt? Why should we do that or not do that?
We shouldn't. We shouldn't do it. It's hard to think of any reason why you would. For one thing, you are guaranteed the bye week of getting no points from that all-important position. So that's right out. 2, if they get hurt or don't meet their expectations, your entire build is kind of in trouble because quarterbacks are they're so important. So why would you risk it in the first place?
Yeah, exactly. And just to put, again, some numbers behind that, there was 1 team that made the final of Best Ball Mania last year that had 1 quarterback. And I want to know about the rest of their roster because that is just wild that they made that happen. But 1 out of 441 teams in the final, and they didn't win. So it wasn't like it gave them the upside either come week 17. So I think definitely avoid drafting 1 quarterback. Now, 4, there's a little bit more of a nuanced conversation there, but I want to approach it the same way. Should we be doing this? Should we not be doing this? Matt, what do you think?
I again think no. Like I'm one that likes to hedge their bets, as you all know if you've been following us, and how I approach these drafts. Before is too much. Like you're wasting a roster spot at that point. Where like if your top quarterbacks didn't perform like that, your entire build is already in trouble, right? Like you're already not going to do well. So why waste an all important roster spot on someone that, if you're lucky, maybe produces for you like 1 week of the year versus using that roster spot on a rookie running back or rookie wide receiver or some player that has the chance to be more of an asset for your team the entire season, except for that maybe 1 week where you need them.
Yeah, and to that point, like fewer teams that made it to the playoffs had 4 quarterback builds compared to the field overall. What was interesting last year is that there was a higher rate of teams who made the finals that had 4 quarterback builds, but their ceiling was kind of hurt. So to the point there, like you only need 3 quarterbacks to kind of have that ceiling performance. And if you're having a 4th quarterback in there, that's taking away another opportunity for any of the other positions, frankly, to have that ceiling performance that might be needed to send you over the top in week 17. So for example, in Best Ball Mania, the top scoring team that had 4 quarterbacks only finished 21st, but most were outside the top 300. And you might think, well, if I make the final in Best Ball Mania, I feel good. And I agree with you. If I make the final, I feel good no matter what. But just as a point of reference for the difference between finishing outside of the top 300 and finishing higher than that, if you're outside of the top 300 last year you were bringing home $1,500. Whereas anywhere above that, you were getting at least $2,000. So, the prize split is substantial, and you are hurting your ceiling by taking that 4 quarterback build route. So overall, draft 2 to 3 quarterbacks, maybe lean on 3 more than 2, but definitely don't do 1 or 4. But what's maybe even more important is not necessarily how many quarterbacks you're drafting, but when you are drafting those quarterbacks. It can be a crucial aspect of getting good value and getting the upside you need to have a really great team. So, Matt, when you are looking at drafting quarterbacks, when do you typically think about drafting your first quarterback?
Yeah, so for me, it depends on how the first few rounds go. Typically, we're seeing quarterbacks going off the board, the first ones going off between round 3 and round 9, and I think that makes sense to me. The thing for me though is quarterbacks are so deep. So personally, I've been really enjoying my builds where I wait until round 6 or 7, and you end up with. I did one earlier today where I ended up with C.J. Stroud, some in the 6th or 7th round, which is a up and comer. You really like that value. It didn't have to reach for him. It let me shore up my running back and wide receiver staples, so to speak. And then you still end up with, I think he's the QB 6 or QB 7 off the board, which is you feel really good about, right? So I like that more so than the early ones. However, that being said, if I get a stud that I can stack with, say, like Lamar Jackson and a Mark Andrews, I've been really like that if it works out. It's hard. You never know what other people are going to do. But in that case, like, okay, maybe I'll reach higher for a quarterback than I normally would to solidify that stack. Where are you thinking?
Yeah, I think very similarly. It depends a little bit on the type of quarterback I'm going after, but that round 3 to 9 range feels really good. And again, looking at what happened last year, this really gets bared out in the numbers. Now, I don't want to rely too much on what happened last year because it's a 1-year sample and things can change from year to year. There are reasons that things happen the way they did last year that they might not this year, but there's still some lessons to be learned from it. So last year, if we look at teams that advanced into the playoffs, there was a significant advantage to having drafted your quarterback in the 3rd round. So the field drafted their first quarterback in the 3rd round 19% of the time, whereas playoff teams that advanced 24%. So a pretty sizable advantage. And when we're thinking about the types of players who were going in the 3rd round, there were 3 players in 2023 that had a 3rd round ADP. One was Jalen Hurts. I don't think he was really helping the advancement rates personally because he didn't have a great season last year. One was Josh Allen, who is almost perennially the top fantasy quarterback, and was probably helping teams advance. The 3rd was Lamar Jackson, who definitely helped people advance because he had a great season. And I definitely had teams where I had Lamar advance into the playoffs, which is great. So that kind of 3rd round where you're getting a dual threat quarterback that has that upside, has the potential to be the number 1 quarterback overall, is really advantageous. However, what was more interesting to me is that round 9 was like the golden place to get your quarterback. And I saw these numbers stand out whenever I ran them. So here's the numbers for you, Matt. The field drafted their first quarterback in round 9, 11% of the time. Playoff teams, 14% of the time, but finalists, 21% of the time. So I'm giving you those numbers. That tells you that should tell you, oh, I should be drafting my quarterback in round 9. But we can't just rely solely on that. Matt, who do you think that quarterback was that was going in that ADP range at this time last year?
I'd guess C.J. Stroud.
That's a really good guess. I love that guess.
Was it Jordan Love?
It was not Jordan Love even. So here's the fascinating thing. Jordan Love at this time last year, just while we're here, just so we can talk about, this is also helpful context just to see how narratives change from year to year. Jordan Love is going in the 14th round last year. CJ Stroud was going in the 17th round last year.
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at the current ADP to an underdog, and we're talking around the ninth round here. We're looking at Jordan Love, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams.
There you go.
That's for ADP. People who knows, but they could be the one that brings you the top.
There you go. Last year, though, there were 2 quarterbacks going in the 9th round. One of them was Anthony Richardson. I can tell you right now, he wasn't the reason you were advancing. because he was hurt. The
Mhm.
other one was none other than Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott,
Oh, Dakota Prescott.
because he ended up finishing as a top 5 quarterback.
Mhm.
So how do we take this information and apply it? It's not just, oh, round 9 is the time to get your quarterback, right? It's not that simple, because that just so happened to be where Dak Prescott was going by ADP last year. What we did learn from it is that Dak Prescott was a value quarterback. He was going fairly late for quarterbacks with high upside, high passing volume, and ended up throwing a lot of touchdowns. So when we're thinking about those quarterbacks, when you want to take your first quarterback, you can take one of those dual threat guys that has the ceiling to be the QB1, or you take a pocket passer who has the potential to pass for a ton of yards and a ton of touchdowns and make his way to QB1 through that route. How do you feel about that, Matt? How do you feel about waiting until round 9 to get a quarterback? And who do you think might be the Dak Prescott this year that is kind of in that same boat?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love it. Like I sort of mentioned earlier, like I'm loving my builds where I, you know, throw a bunch of things at running back and wide receiver and tight end. And then you end up with one of these quarterbacks that has the potential to be top 5, right? So for me, I think just looking at the current ADP, I mean, Dak Prescott's still going off as QB9. ADP is 96th, which he was a top 5 guy. So him, if he lasts
Yeah.
that long, like, yeah, why wouldn't you, like, what's changed there to make you think that they're going to, not have a similar sort of offense this year? So I'm targeting him. I do like Jordan Love. And I really like where Tua's going, and he's even later, QB 15. Last year, kind of staved off the injury concerns, had a really nice year. I think he's someone that is going off as QB 15 that can easily be a top 5 QB if all things go the right way.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think that's a good route to be in. And that way, too, you're also getting elite players at the premium positions like wide receiver and even running back. You can get some good value there. You can kind of fill out your team and then just drop in a quarterback that's going to work with your roster construction you've done.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of great options that are really cheap, and you don't need them to do too much to pay off that value for you. But we've drafted one quarterback now. We've done it sometime between rounds 3 and 9, depending on like the type of guy we're going after. Now we need to draft a second quarterback. So this is where we can get some interesting strategies coming in, because I think some people like to go the bully quarterback route. We've heard about bully tight end, which we'll talk about in a later episode. What about you? What are you thinking about when you're trying to draft that second quarterback? When are you looking to get that quarterback?
Yeah, I like to just see how the board's falling to me. So there are some really nice value quarterbacks that are going off between QB, I don't know, 12 and 18 that you can wait a decent amount of time to go and get. So kind of depending on, again, how my roster is being constructed, I'm really liking, for example, Justin Herbert, someone who, the shine's a little bit off of him at the moment.
Yeah.
And obviously the Chargers, they don't have a whole lot of weapons, but they're throwing a bunch of darts out there. But he's coming off the board as QB 17, right? With an ADP of like 133. So you can get him in, I think I just got him in like the 14th round, which he is a guy who could potentially be a top 5 QB. Again, they're going to be asking him to do a lot. You know what I mean? So I really like, and sort of as we talked about with, Dak Prescott crushing it last year, there's just a good amount of luck involved in fantasy football, right? Like one of these guys is going to crush it. We don't know which one. So I do like waiting a little bit. And, I have some of my guys who I think can, be really good. So I lean more towards the 14th and 15th round, because you will be sitting there and you'll be surprised at the names that are still available to you later on. You don't have to rush it.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. To kind of illustrate that, in last season, some of the quarterbacks that were going in that round 14, 15 range, Jordan Love was one of them, Brock Purdy another. Two that didn't really pan out was Kenny Pickett and Bryce Young. So it's a little bit hit or miss. But then you also have CJ Stroud, who is going in the 17th round, so you could have gotten him even later. And those were all guys, at least Love, Purdy, and Stroud. They all beat their ADP by far. Even Matt Stafford went off towards the end of the 13th round last year, and I would argue he was a pretty great steal given his ADP. When we look at the numbers from last year, it's often that the teams that are having the best success in advancing are getting their second quarterback between rounds 10 and 15. And let's play another game. I'm putting Matt on the spot here by like getting him to guess quarterbacks. But something that fascinated me was there was a big spike last year, particularly in round 11. So 10% of teams in the field and who advanced to the playoffs got their second quarterback in round 11, but 24% of teams who were in the finals got their quarterback in round 11. And I was like, who the heck was going in the 11th round that made these finalists just kill it and made this rate so high? So, Matt, do you want to garner any guesses as what 11th round quarterback?
Kirk Cousins.
You know, I love that pick. He's like Kirk Cousins. I don't know if that helps you any.
Does that help me at all?
To Kirk Cousins.
Like Kirk Cousins.
All the time.
Yeah, I do not know. Baker Mayfield.
Oh, I also really like that one. No, he was going even later. It was Jared Goff.
There you go. Okay.
Jared Goff, 11th round value, had a ton of upside. Again, this is to say that there's value to be had if you hit on these quarterbacks. But most important to me in all of this was just noticing the discrepancy between teams getting two quarterbacks before they hit round 10. So the field did this 32% of the time. Playoff teams only did this 30% of the time, so a little bit less often. But finalists did it only 8% of the time. Now, again, that's swayed heavily by the fact that Dak Prescott and Jared Goff had killer years. That doesn't mean it's going to happen for sure this year, but what we do see is that getting two quarterbacks early is not necessarily advantageous, because what are you giving up in order to do that? You are probably giving up a good receiver or a good running back. And remember that you only get the points that the quarterback adds to your team, right? So your second quarterback, for them to add any points to your team, they have to be ready to outperform your QB1. And if you have a really solid QB1, they may never do that. And so it may just be a wasted roster spot for you all season. So summarizing all of these takeaways, draft 2 to 3 quarterbacks. Do not draft 1 or 4. Definitely don't draft 1. If you want to one time draft 4, I will allow it, but I do not recommend it. And then after that, don't draft a quarterback in the first round. We didn't even talk about this. I got so excited about all the other stats that I forgot to throw the stat out here, but I wanted to just like quickly let you know, don't draft a quarterback in the first round. It is awful for your team. I believe there was, again, only one team who made the Best Ball Mania final last year who drafted their quarterback in the first round. It's an awful strategy. Don't do it. And then when you're thinking about when you draft your quarterback, you want a guy that has the dual threat ability. Those are the guys you can take early, or a pocket passer with upside. Those are the guys that are usually values you can take late. And I like a potential rule of thumb is don't take two quarterbacks before round 10. I think that's a nice way to approach it. There's a lot of guys that are values later on the board. That might not be, there might be some exceptions to that rule. You might do, if your second quarterback's in round 9, that's close enough. And I might, yeah, sure. But I think aiming to wait to get your second at round 10 or later is a really good approach. So now we're going to turn to one of our recurring segments on the show where we're tracking off-season narratives and trying to figure out what do we do about this in best ball leagues. So I found this lovely article, which if I told you when this was written, if I didn't tell you when this was written, you might think that it was written like 2 years ago, frankly. But here it is being written again. Ravens predict Rashod Bateman will break out in 2024 by Jamison Hensley of ESPN. Here's some of the sounds bites. This is Ravens tight end Mark Andrews saying, "I think he looks incredible. His route running, catching the ball, being where he's supposed to be, he has it down to a science. I know he's worked really hard, but he looks about as put together as he's ever been. So it's going to be a big year for Rashod Bateman. I'm calling it now." End quote. That was all Mark Andrews, just for the record, all Mark Andrews. So right now, Rashod Bateman, wide receiver for the old Baltimore Ravens, is being drafted at the 166th pick in drafts. 166th pick. What round is that? That's the 13th round. So he's basically free in best ball leagues. Matt, what do you think about this news? Do you think this is going to be the year Rashod Bateman finally breaks out?
I mean, maybe. I mean, the thing that I like about this, though, is like you said, he's basically free. He's coming off as wide receiver 74, which at that point, if you're in these drafts, you're throwing darts. Like there's no guarantees here. Like you're just trying to grab your people. So I think looking at the people that are around him, I kind of like him. I kind of like him at that ADP. Will that actually break out? Will he actually break out and be, a top 30 wide receiver? I doubt it. There's too many weapons there. The Ravens just invested in Derrick Henry too. You know what I mean? And we got your Zay Flowers breakout incoming. I really like Isaiah Likely there with Andrew. Like there's just a lot of players there on the Ravens to make it so Bateman doesn't actually break out, but again, at that ADP, I know in a few of my drafts where I did end up with Lamar, I love targeting Bateman there way at the end because that's like a sneaky little stash or stack. But yeah, no, he's not going to break out. Stop trying to make it happen.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not so certain that the breakout's going to happen, but I agree with one of the premises you threw out there, which is if you're drafting a Baltimore Ravens team and you have Lamar Jackson, why not? He's free. And then you'll have the stack there for the 1 week, 2 weeks that he does pop off. And hey, if it happens in week 17, it could win you a ton of money. That could be really great, right? So I agree with that. I will say if you are in a sit and go league where it's just you and 11 other people, I might not target him as frequently because of some of the other players that I like more than him around his ADP. Like I think Wan'Dale Robinson, as we will talk about in a second, I'm a big fan of. I think he's got a chance to get a lot of touches in that offense. Antonio Gibson is going in that range. He's a pretty good value, especially if you have only like kind of 2 running backs at that point. You're taking that 0 running back approach. Chuba Hubbard, even there, is good. And then there's some even valuable quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield and Geno Smith that if you're trying to get your second or third quarterback, it's a great spot. So for tournaments, again, if I'm drafting a Lamar Jackson team, I love it. If I am in a sit and go, I'm probably not going to have too much Rashod Bateman, except on rare occasions when maybe like Wan'Dale Robinson is already gone because I'm just obsessed with Wan'Dale this year. Okay, our second news clip. It's not an article. It's a TV show. I don't know if you've heard about it, Matt. It's kind of new on the scene. It's called Hard Knocks. It is actually technically new on the scene, by the way, because it is off-season Hard Knocks and not the preseason Hard Knocks. But there's been all of these clips coming out from Hard Knocks of New York Giants general manager Joe Schoen talking about how Daniel Jones is our guy, and I'm not giving up on Daniel Jones. There was a Weiland quote where he was like, we're not paying him $40 million to hand off to a $12 million running back, which is technically fair, but okay. So there's a lot of love for Daniel Jones. And look, I'm a fan of Daniel Jones in fantasy football as much as probably anyone, but I don't know what to make of this GM speak by Joe Schoen. How are you feeling about Daniel Jones, all the Daniel Jones hype that New York is trying to spew out into the world?
Yeah, I mean, someone has to believe in him. It just so happens to be the guy that gave him all the money, right? So that's awfully convenient. But I mean, look who's behind him, right? It's Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, Nathan Rourke. So like, this is Daniel Jones's team this year, right? Looking at where he's being drafted as the QB 27. So as I was talking about earlier about you'll be surprised at the people that are available to you, like in the last rounds. Like you go ahead and draft Daniel Jones as your third quarterback. I mean, he's only a couple years removed from his top 5 QB year, right? Like this is someone that you can get for free who will be the starting quarterback for an NFL franchise, pending health. So will he absolutely break out again and you're a top 10 guy? He doesn't have to be at that ADP. He just has to do it like once or twice, right? And maybe he, helps you advance. So do I think he's the long-term solution at quarterback for the Giants? Absolutely not. I do not think that. But from a fantasy perspective, in terms of value, like this is someone who I really, really like there right at the end.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's all about the opportunity cost and the value on him. And I did draft him recently. I was like, I know I drafted him recently. I can't remember what draft is this. This is let's see if I can figure out what this is really quickly. This is it's the NFL. It's on DraftKings. It's a 3 entry max that they did. It's called the button hook. It was a $9 entry fee. Top prize, there's $300,000 in total prizes. I can't tell you the top prize right now because DraftKings app is a little bit funky when trying to find that stuff in a pinch. But I ended up drafting him with my 16th, 15th pick. This draft, it's wild. His ADP on DraftKings in particular is 187. So to your point, like when you get to that point of your draft, it's kind of like, why not? And I'd gotten into a situation where I drafted Brock Purdy as my first quarterback, and then I was searching for that second quarterback the whole time, and eventually Daniel Jones is there, and I'm like, well, he has rushing upside. He's had good fantasy output, good fantasy seasons even, and last year the Giants did have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. I'm not sure what they did to improve that this year, but I'm hopeful that they at least know that was a problem. So hopefully there's some better health on the offensive line this year, and they can manage to protect Daniel Jones. I wouldn't just shoot him up ADP boards and take him way ahead of cost. Like take advantage of the fact that he's free. Particularly, there's some New York Giants receivers that are going late, so it makes for some nice late round stacking that you can make happen. And off the top of my head, I seem to appreciate their Week 17 matchup, but we'll get to that at another time. So I promised you that we would have listener questions, and we do. We have one listener question this week that comes from Gator J, who posted this in the comment section of our last episode, and so now we're getting to chat about it. Gator asks, how often are you looking at your exposures? Is it after every draft? At what point, in your opinion, are you, quote, overexposed? So this was a topic we discussed on our podcast last week about exposure rates and how we are handling those. Matt, what is your response to this? How often are you checking it? And at what point do you feel overexposed?
Yeah, I mean, I check it fairly frequently. I mean, especially if you're playing in these tournaments for money, like these are all lottery tickets, right? Like, of course, we have our guys who we really, really like. But sometimes you're wrong. More often than not, you're wrong. So I like to spread things out. Obviously, some things just naturally happen. So looking at my exposure right now, some of those really late round guys who I think can have the opportunity or the chance to completely outdo their ADP. Some league winning upside. I am more exposed in. I feel less bad about that because again, they're free. Like it's not costing you anything really. You're not relying on them to do stuff. Versus the first, I'll just say the first 10 rounds of guys. I like there to be some balance there, and of course that comes down to where you're randomly getting slotted in for your draft pick. So right now I'm heavily exposed with Tyreek Hill because for whatever reason, Underdog has decided that they want to throw me at third all the time, which like I'm not mad about, but I'd like some diversity there. How are you handling it?
Yeah, very similarly. I think I'll usually take a peek at it before I start a new draft. I'll often have it up on my desktop computer. Why did I say it like that? What am I in 1994? On my laptop. I will have my app on my phone. I'll be drafting there, and I'll have the website on the computer and looking at my exposures there at the same time, so I can kind of check it out while I'm drafting. I do a lot of slow drafts, so I will while I'm drafting and when I'm on the clock, I'll go quickly check my exposure rates, particularly in tournaments. To your point, Matt, before I do that, so I'm doing it pretty much every time that I'm drafting because I want to remind myself where I'm at, and I do it enough that I have just kind of a general sense of where I have player takes. But I will say, I checked in on Underdog, and I've been checking Underdog exposures a lot because that's where I draft more often than not. I am most exposed. My money is most exposed to Wan'Dale Robinson. But percentage wise, the person I've drafted the most is actually, well, it's a 4-way tie. Now that I'm looking at this, which is hilarious. It's Javonte Williams, which I'm scared about. Keon Coleman, which is kind of fun. We'll see. Antonio Gibson, which I actually like. And then Isaiah Likely, which I don't fully understand. But as a contrast, I have not been checking DraftKings as closely. And I just thought to myself, I wonder what my DraftKings exposure rate is. I have drafted the wonderful Los Angeles Rams stack of Matthew Stafford and DeMarcus Robinson 50% of the time so far.
Okay.
I've only completed 6 drafts, so it could be worse. But that tells me, now that I know that and I've seen that, I'm probably not going to do that the next time I draft on DraftKings, or I'm going to make sure that on Underdog, I'm underexposed to those players. So again, I do it every time I draft. Sometimes I do it while I'm drafting, but overall, I'm trying to stay below 30% at all costs. But if there's a player I'm over 30% on, I want to at least like the player and feel good about drafting them as frequently as I do.
Yeah, I was going to say 40% for me. Like some of them are tough, like the late round guys. Like my number one is Bucky Irving on Tampa Bay, which again, not anyone you're relying on, but like I think he has a chance. I'm not a huge Rashod White guy, so it's like, yeah, Bucky Irving, get in there. So I'm okay with him being more. But again, those the pillars of your team, like those types of stacks there. I'm looking for personally 40% or fewer.
Yeah, I really hear that. I think that's good. I think with outside of the players that I love, hanging around the kind of 20 to 25% range feels good. And then there's some players that I'm like, I don't like this player, so I want to be lowly exposed to them. I want it to be like 10% or less. So it again, it does depend a little bit on my player take, but somewhere between that 10 to 30, 40% range feels good to me. I definitely in my baseball best ball drafts, I had some players that I was at 40%. I think one in particular, Matt Olson, I was really excited about, but he's not hitting home runs the way he was last year. So that one's actually hurting pretty badly right now. But that is going to be all for this week. Before you go, again, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on those notifications. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Club Fantasy FFL. We go live every day. If you're looking to practice what we discuss during this show, don't forget to check out our other Best Ball podcast, Masterclass, on Tuesdays at 8:30, where Stacy, Perez, and Gator J are doing real life best ball drafts every time, which is incredible. And you can draft with them if you get in at the right time. But you gotta be paying attention, because it depends. Like if it's Underdog, it's just like they hit draft and you go live right then. So you got to be ready to go. We also have dynasty shows happening on Sundays and Thursdays. We have mock drafts happening Monday, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Our DFS golf show posts on Tuesdays, and our flagship show, no pun intended, airs on Wednesdays. Don't forget, when the season starts, we'll have our DFS podcast return. You just need to be following us because we put out so much content every day of the week. But for Matt Record, I'm Austin Amandolia. This has been Summer School. And until next time, remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and best ball wins money. We'll see you next time.